2 years ago, I did a radio commentary about a man I have never met. His story was so interesting, and it told so much about what life has become in this country that it has stuck in my mind. And tonight I'd like to share it with you. The man's name is Carl Magnuson. In the early 70s, he held a comfortable position on the faculty of a well-known state university. He was secure and well paid. His students and colleagues respected him, but he was bored and unsatisfied with college life. And after thinking about it a long while, he decided to begin a new life. He left the university and bought a plot of land in Topaz, Michigan, a town so small it's not on many maps. Carl became a farmer. He learned to live independently, close to the land. He took part in the life of his local community. But scarcely had he arrived in the great pine forests of northern Michigan when he learned that the people of his little community were under almost constant assault from higher levels of government. The first problem came from a regional planning commission. Its members were appointed, not elected. They had the idea that all future growth and development in Carl's region should be confined to two favored growth center areas, leaving Topaz in a permanent no-growth zone. Carl and his neighbors fought back, and for daring to challenge the sacred cow of regional planning, they were branded as right-wing nuts. But while this battle was going on, the U.S. Forest Service appeared on the scene. It wanted to use helicopters to spray the forest with chemical defoliants. That meant spraying people's homes and livestock, even their children. So Carl and his neighbors went to court and got an injunction to keep from being sprayed by the U.S. government. This won them recognition as concerned environmentalists. Soon after this, along came the U.S. Navy with a plan to build a massive communications array in Carl's township. Carl and his neighbors fought back again. This time, a prominent state official branded them communists. Then back came the Forest Service, considering the idea of designating hundreds of thousands of acres of forest as permanent wilderness. The same people defended their community one more time. For this, they were labeled greedy exploiters of the forests. These were the same people who had just been applauded as environmentalists for opposing the toxic spraying of those same forests. All this made Carl Magnuson begin to wonder. On one day, he and his friends were attacked for being left-wingers, the next for being right-wingers. How could this be? The left-right opposition, Carl concluded, functions as a smokescreen that obscures and diverts people's attention from a real and terrifying process that has developed with frightening rapidity in capitalist and socialist countries alike. The real threat is the enormous enlargement and the decisive centralization of all the means of power and decision. And I think he is absolutely right. The overriding question is not one of left or right. It is one of reversing the flow of power and control to ever more remote institutions, and of restoring that power to the individual, the family, and the local community. Richard Goodwin, not one of my advisors, but one who came to Washington 20 years ago for the New Frontier, has said much the same thing. The most troubling political fact of our age, he wrote, is that the growth in central power has been accompanied by a swift and continual diminution of the significance of the individual citizen, transforming him from a wielder into an object of authority. This stripping of power and decision-making from the individual, the family, and the community has had unhappy effects on our people. It has stifled their creative energies. It has tended to make them seekers after permits, rather than doers of fine and generous deeds. It has left them resisting the dictates of a distant authority, instead of working together in a more constructive cause. It has left them disgusted with the institutions of this nation. They are losing faith in a system over which they have come to believe they can have little influence. They are, all too often, simply powerless, and they are angry about it. As the power of large, centralized institutions grows, the power and vitality of locality, of community, of neighborhood, of parish, all shrink away until the citizen is left face to face with an all-powerful and little-caring state. 30 years ago, a young congressman recognized this truth. Only by doing the work ourselves, he said, by giving generously out of our own pockets, can we hope in the long run to maintain the authority of the people over the state, to ensure that the people remain the master, the state, the servant. Every time that we try to lift a problem from our own shoulders and shift that problem to government, to the same extent we are sacrificing the liberties of our people. The name of that young man was John F. Kennedy. and the danger he foresaw 30 years ago has largely come to pass. Our national government has grown to the point where it taxes away a record 21% of the gross national product of our people. That same government has found thousands of ways to spend your money, all too frequently in ineffective programs which seem to fold, spindle, and mutilate reed human beings instead of helping them. The same government has become an intrusive policeman in the lives of millions of Americans. Its firearms agents devise elaborate schemes to entrap law-abiding merchants into violations of the law. Its Interior Department harasses innocent landowners and tries to drive them off their own land. Its tax collectors seem determined to drive thousands of independent contractors out of business. Its Labor Department sends out inspectors to find mothers who are earning money at home while caring for their children and puts them out of work. Its Energy Department tries to impose costly and unnecessary conservation requirements on home builders. Its Justice Department goes to court to urge the busing of children far away from their own neighborhoods and their parents, merely to satisfy some arbitrary ideal of racial balance. Its Department of Transportation spends years and millions of dollars prescribing the perfect city bus, which, it turns out, builders can't build and cities don't want. Its Department of Education unwittingly tries to destroy some of the nation's oldest and most respected black colleges and universities. Its Postal Service prosecutes a lady in Rochester who opens a courier service among downtown offices which provides better, faster, and cheaper service without taxpayer subsidy. In short, our federal government has become a growing threat to the liberties of our people. At the same time, it is consuming their substance through record-breaking taxation. And even that isn't enough to pay for its excesses. So a Democratic Congress and a Democratic President run an annual deficit, print new money to cover that deficit, cheapen the value of the dollar by 12 cents every year, rob the paycheck of every working man and woman and the savings account for every senior citizen, and unleash a runaway inflation that threatens the integrity of our whole economic system. And it does another thing. By its ever-present influence, by its web of regulation, by its confiscation of private capital, the federal government is slowly stifling the creative energies of a free people. Throughout our history, Americans have been remarkable for their creativity, their ability to devise ingenious new solutions to problems. But that creativity is in mortal danger under a government which seems to be heading in the direction of everything not forbidden is required. What is at stake is our liberty. Thomas Jefferson recognized long ago that the mortal enemy of liberty and community is the concentration of power. He asked, "What has destroyed liberty and the rights of man in every government that has ever existed under the sun?" And he answered, "The generalizing and concentrating all cares and powers into one body." The task for us is clear. We must reverse the trend toward the concentration of power into ever more remote and unreachable institutions, and instead make sure that that power is widely distributed among the people, among families, among individuals, among independent businesses and worker organizations, among our local communities and their social institutions. We must let the genius of our people flower once again, as it did through the years when this brave new country grew into the freest, most prosperous nation on the face of the earth. To do that will require strong, dedicated national leadership in the presidency and in the Congress. And that leadership will have to have the strong support of the American people. Our first task is to begin to celebrate once again the virtue of human scale in our institutions. Human scale is the scale that human beings can understand and cope with. It is the scale of the local fraternal lodge, the church and synagogue and congregation, the women's group and the luncheon club. It is the locally owned factory, where the owners are also employees, who live nearby and care about the well-being of their fellow workers and their community. It's the small businessmen and women who personally deal with customers, who put their reputation on the line, who stand behind the firm's products or services. It is the farm or consumer cooperative, the town or neighborhood bank that reinvests savings in its community, the democratically governed union local. The human scale is the town council, the board of selectmen, the precinct captain, the ward leader, the committee man and woman. It is this activity on a human scale that creates the fabric of community and provides the framework for the exercise of responsible liberty. The human scale defines an arena for civic action, for mutual aid, cooperation, and self-help, where people can join together to deal with common problems using their own energies, resources, and leadership. Indeed, many believe, and I have long been among them, that the strength of our institutions depends critically upon the strength of the human community upon which they rest. When decision-making power and resources are stripped away from that human-scale community, when a dominating government in City Hall or the state capitol, or worst of all in Washington, usurps the authority of the people and reduces them to objects to be manipulated, then we are in danger of losing the one thing that has over 3 centuries made us the great nation we are. When one looks at the extent to which government giantism and the inseparable political, social, and economic giantism now pervades American life, one may well fear for the future of our liberties. But despite this troubling trend, there is much left of the American spirit. In my campaign and in my years of public office, I have seen many examples of the rich activity on the human scale which has been the glory of our past and is yet the hope of our future. I have seen block clubs and neighborhood federations, chambers of commerce and youth centers. There are community gardens, even in the midst of some of our largest cities. There are land trusts and co-ops and neighborhood newspapers. There are appropriate technology projects and community recycling centers. There are projects to help small farmers remain on the land and to help small business acquire the capital it needs to expand. There are women's groups and church groups, business groups and labor groups, service clubs and local development corporations. These are the associations at a human scale that must be nourished if America is to remain strong and free. The great French commentator Alexis de Tocqueville noted this long ago when he observed that the morals and intelligence of a democratic people would be in as much danger as its commerce and industry if ever a government wholly usurped the place of private associations. There is no shortage of ideas for nourishing self-help, association, and voluntary action, only a shortage of will in Washington, where the idea of returning power to the people of this country is viewed with alarm, suspicion, and contempt. But it is time to begin. And the first thing we can do is to put an end to foolish and dangerous government meddling into things that free people can better deal with in their local communities. This is not to say that the wealthier citizens or areas of this country are to be relieved of the responsibility of assisting the less fortunate. But it does mean that we must begin to devolve responsibilities from the national government to lower levels, levels as close as possible to the people themselves. A second step, inseparably linked to the first, is to restore to the people the resources their national government has taken from them to pay for things they don't need and don't want. We need a substantial across-the-board income tax cut for individuals, 10% in 1982, another 10% in 1983, and another 10% in 1984. This will put money back in the pockets of the people, as well as stimulating a new wave of job-creating investment in our economy. It will give them and their local governments a new opportunity to deal with problems their own way, instead of having solutions dictated to them by a distant bureaucracy which knows or cares little about their needs.